Welcome back to history. They buried, where the past is never truly dead, just hidden. Each day we unearth the forgotten, the covered up, and the unspeakable truths buried beneath everyday lives. What you're about to hear isn't just a story. It's a warning. This is the macabre history of the Elbridge family, a legacy of silence, ritual, and blood that still echoes through the hollows of Appalachia. The Elbridge homestead still shows up on some old land surveys from the early 1900s. A crooked square carved into mountains between Jackson County, Kentucky, and the Virginia border. But if you try to follow that path today, you won't find much more than scattered brickwork and a collapsed foundation. Under roots, the forest took it back like it wanted it buried. And maybe it should have stayed that way. The first signs that something was wrong in the Elbridge line don't come from court records or police files. They come from whispers in church logs, sealed birth certificates, and the old 1869 census entry written in pencil, so faint it's almost invisible. It lists the original head of household as Jonah Elbridge, 38, farmer. His wife Mary, age 17, under children, just one word, expected. But here's where it starts to curdle. By the 1880 census, Jonah was gone. Mary was still there, now listed as head mistress of the home. But the real chill comes from how many people were living with her. 7 children, all listed with the surname Elbridge. No other adults. And under relation to head of house for each child unknown. The doctor who signed the death certificate of Jonah Elbridge claimed it was natural causes. Yet later, in his own journal, recovered in a historical archive in 1972, he wrote, "There was nothing natural about what I saw in that house. He died with his eyes wide open, pupils pinned, his mouth packed with wax, and Mary refused to bury him until the 3rd day, said she was waiting for a sign." By the time railroad surveyors passed through the region in 1895, one of them made a private note in his field book that still survives in a museum basement in Corbin. "Avoid the Elbridge Ridge. There's singing from the trees some nights in no language I know. They say it's just the girls practicing hymns. I don't think so." From this point on, the Elbridge family disappears and reappears across history like ghosts, never staying in official records long, but always showing up when something went wrong. Dead livestock, sealed wells, children gone visiting who never returned. Yet no one in the region dared accuse them openly, even in letters sent to state officials. The family is only ever referred to as them folks up the ridge. And then in 1901, something unexplainable was found. 3 men clearing brush stumbled on a white dress, still pristine, draped across a wooden frame near the ruins of the Elbridge home. The bodice was filled with hair, the sleeve stitched shut. Inside the chest cavity was a single sentence embroidered in red thread: "The bride returns when the sun is ready." Before we continue with the story and unspeakable secrets, I want to ask you something important. This channel is not for everyone. Only the bravest souls who dare to confront the darkest chapters of American history. If you made it this far, you're not like most people. You understand some truths are too horrifying to ignore, no matter how much they disturb us. So hit that subscribe button and join our community of true mystery seekers. And tell me in the comments what state you are listening from. Are you brave enough to hear a story like this from your own backyard? Her name was Martha Caldwell, and in 1904, she was one of the last official government visitors to enter the Elbridge property alive. Martha wasn't a journalist. She wasn't even particularly brave. She was a field nurse assigned to travel across rural Kentucky, checking on births, infant health, and home conditions under the new Public Welfare Mothers Act. Her journey into the Elbridge Hollow was meant to be routine, just a quick inspection, one of dozens she did that spring. She never spoke about what she found, but her ledger found in the attic of a government storage barn in 1967 tells a different story, written in tight cursive under April 14, 1904. She writes, "Arrive at ridge by foot, air close, forest quiet, too quiet, no sound. But shoes on dry soil, house visible from path, structure crooked, roof. Sagged, smells of turpentine and elder root. She approached and knocked. Girl answered. No older than 12. Bare feet, long dress. Thin as paper. Martha wrote, child would not speak, eyes glassy, not unkind, just watching. She was invited inside, or rather, the girl turned and walked away without a word. Martha followed. Inside it was dark. All the windows were covered with dried plants, bundles of something brittle tied with animal. Sinew. The air had a strange scent. Pine, wax, and something else like iron. Martha wrote, multiple girls inside, all look alike. No male voices heard. One older woman in chair, maybe matriarch, face painted with white powder, said nothing, just hummed. A pot was boiling on the hearth. Smelled off something in it with teeth. Every corner of home had mirrors, but all turned to face walls. She was offered tea. She declined. In one room, she was shown what she was told was a newborn, but the swaddled form was too still, and the skin was gray. Martha wrote, told the infant was born of blood prose me. Girl holding it smiled, missing all her front teeth. She left quickly, but at the bottom of the ledger page, in darker ink and shaky hand, she added, this is not a family. This is a vault. Something is kept here. Martha returned to her district station. 2 days later, she filed her report, but from that day on, she refused any more ridge assignments. In fact, she never left her town again. Locals said she changed after that visit. Grew pale, grew silent. Died in 1911 at just 36. On her death certificate, the doctor wrote, exhaustion of unknown origin. The Elbridge Ridge was never inspected again by public health officers. But the story didn't end there. Just 5 years later, a group of boys out hunting along the ridge claimed they saw a line of girls in white standing in the tree inn. They didn't move, didn't speak, just stared. When the boys ran, one tripped, and when he looked back, all the girls were gone. But something else had been left in the dirt behind him. A tooth, smooth human, still warm. By 1919, whispers about the Elbridge Ridge had reached the county. Courthouse in Whitley County, Kentucky. The rumors weren't new. People had been avoiding the trail up Black Hollow for decades. But now there was something more serious. Children had gone missing. 2, to be exact. Samuel Byrne, 9, and Betty Jo Clemens, 7. Cousins who'd gone foraging in the woods just after church. Their trail led toward the Elbridge boundary, past a dry creek, and into a pine thicket, then vanished. No footprints, no torn cloth, no signs of a struggle, just one thing left behind. Betty Jo's bonnet wedged in a thorn bush. The inside was wet, but not with rain. That was a final straw for Deputy Franklin Harker, a war veteran who'd returned from France with a limp and a temper. He knew the Elbridge family, knew they kept to themselves, but he also remembered what his own grandmother said about them. That ridge is where God left off and something else took over. So Harker filed a petition, a rare legal maneuver, to forcibly inspect a homestead on grounds of suspected abduction and unlawful burial. The judge signed it, but no sheriff volunteered to go. Eventually, Harker and 2 civilian men rode up the ridge with dogs and shovels. What they found would never be spoken of, officially again. The sealed report, partially burned but recovered in a courthouse fire in 1962, gives a grim account. It reads, the house was unoccupied at the time of entry, doors unlatched, food on the table still warm. Numerous hand-carved dolls found in upstairs room, all with faces resembling real people. One bore a stitch name, Betty Jo. No adult bodies discovered, no sign of living residents. However, a cellar door was found beneath the hearth, concealed with boards. Upon entry, a significant odor of rotten metal. Cellar contained 11 wooden crates. Inside each, layered fabric, root bundles preserved. Human remains, unclear if embalmed or natural desiccation. Specimens include infants, juveniles, and at least one adult female. One line had been scrolled in pencil across the bottom, not typed. The eyes are all open. The Elbridge name was struck from the census the following year. Officially, the family was declared migrated to unknown territories. But no, migration documents exist. No tickets, no property sales, nothing. The home was boarded up, the path blocked with barbed wire. But locals said the ridge still hummed at night, a kind of low sound, like bees behind walls. And once a year in the second week of October, someone would hang 3 black feathers from the church door in Pine Knot. No note, no unseen, just the feathers. When asked, the pastor said only this: it's their way of reminding us the Elbridges were never gone. They just sank deeper. In 1937, nearly 2 decades after the failed Elbridge investigation, a man stumbled out of a tree in behind the Pine Knot General Store, barefoot and blooded with a length of barbed wire tangled around one arm. His name was Arlen Buckner, a moonshiner, drifter, and part-time bootleg hauler who was well known by lawmen in 3 counties. But on this morning he was unrecognizable, filthy, trembling, and missing several fingernails. The only word he could say over and over again was, she watches, even from the dirt. Locals took him in, assuming he'd suffered an accident in the woods or a bad still explosion. But doctors at the Whitley Infirmary found no burns, no signs of alcohol poisoning, just deep, deliberate cuts along his forearms, old scars, and a fresh brand on his back. It wasn't fire-branded, but something deeper, carved, a symbol, 3 interlocked triangles. No one in town recognized it except the town's oldest resident, Miss Edith Mays, who ran the post office. She hadn't spoken the Elbridge name in years, but when she saw the mark, her face turned pale. There's, she whispered, the mark they gave the boys they kept. Arlen was committed to the state hospital in Danville after several episodes of screaming fits, always triggered by the smell of fresh bread or the sound of creaking wood. Nurses kept him sedated most days. But one night when the drugs wore off too soon, he wrote something on the wall in his own blood. 5 words: do not bury the dead. That same week, a social worker curious about Arlen's sudden mental break tried tracing where he might have been. She found a trail, just a rumor, really, that he had a map, not a road map, but an old family land deed he'd been trying to trade for whiskey. It was dated 1881, signed by Virgil Elbridge. That map was never found, but what was found months late was the remains of 2 dug-up graves near Black Hollow, both empty. The sheriff refused to comment. In her last public statement before her death, Miss Edith said this to a church congregation: the Elbridges never left us. Some bloodlines don't end. They just dry up, waiting for the right mouth to drink again. Arlen Buckner died in 1943. His body was cremated. But before that, the mortician noticed something disturbing. The skin on his back, where the mark had been carved. It had healed completely, but the symbol was still visible from beneath the skin as if it was growing. Next, we uncovered the last surviving Elbridge heir and the strange letter he left behind before vanishing into the mountains. In the spring of 1954, Pine, Knott's only barber, Frankie Bell, made a strange call to the sheriff. He'd been cleaning out the back room of his shop, a space he rented for cheap to travelers, when he discovered a small bundle hidden inside the chimney flue. Inside, an oilcloth satchel stained with soot, a rusted harmonica, and a folded, yellowed letter signed E. The handwriting was tight and frantic. The ink had faded, but the message remained clear. I write this with the last of my fingers. The rest, she took, said I had no need for them in the next life, only my eyes, so I can keep watch. The letter never explained who she was, but the postscript sent a chill down Frankie's spine. I buried Mama 4 times. She never stayed down. Frankie turned it over to the sheriff, but by morning, the letter had vanished from the evidence file. No official record remained, only Frankie's memory and a photograph he'd taken for insurance. The sheriff who handled it, Dale Cormack, resigned 2 months later and left Kentucky altogether. He was last seen in Ohio panhandling outside a church. Later, that same year, a pair of schoolboys playing along the Cumberland River stumbled onto something else. An old Elbridge family locket half sunk in the mud. Inside wasn't a photo but a lock. Of hair, black, preserved, fresh. DNA wasn't widely used then, but the coroner who handled the locket wrote a personal note. If this hair is as old as a locket, something unnatural is preserving it or someone. By 1957, whispers of the Elbridge family began again, this time with sightings. In the hills above Pine Knot, several hikers reported seeing a woman in gray, tall, motionless, always barefoot, watching from the ridge, her face never clear, her eyes always fixed on something just beyond them. Back in town, a local pastor, Reverend Albirun, began to warn people on in his sermons, not every grave stays buried. Some families find ways to bind the soul, to soil, especially if it suits their hunger. He was fired from the church. That winter, declared mentally unfit to preach. A month later, he was found sitting in the middle of Route 92, naked, weeping, and clutching a human jawbone. His own blood smeared across his chest in the shape of 3 triangles. In 1963, Deputy Clara Wills was new to McCreary County, fresh from Louisville, assigned to quiet patrol duty around Pine Knot. She didn't believe the local superstitions, not the whispers about witches, nor the nonsense about cursed bloodlines. That changed one night when she was called to a reporter screaming from under the church floor. It came from the old oak chapel, a wooden structure, abandoned since 1918. Locals said it had once been funded by the Elbridge family, then quietly shut down after a boy was found hanging in the bell tower with no ladder in sight. Clara expected nothing. Maybe some animals trapped below, maybe some prank by teenagers. But what she found in the crawl space would follow her to her dying day. The space beneath the floorboards wasn't just dirt. It had been dug out intentionally with planks used to brace the walls like a makeshift shelter. And inside a girl, not a child, not quite, grown, dirty, thin, with matted hair and a stitched-up mouth. She was alive, but barely. When Clara tried to speak, the girl clawed at the dirt beside her, revealing a faded cloth doll and a worn Bible, the pages inked and red-filled, with names. Every single name ended in Elbridge. The girl's wrists were branded with the same 3 interlocked triangles. But there was something else. A second mark burned into the wood above her bed. She breathed through the roots. The girl was taken to hospital, but never spoke, not even after her stitches were removed. She didn't cry. She didn't blink. And when the lights were turned off at night, her heart monitor spiked violently. Doctors noted her pupils were unusually wide in darkness, almost feline-like. They preferred it. Within days, men in plain black government sedans arrived. They produced federal documentation, transferred the girl quietly, and demanded the church be boarded shut. Clara protested and was removed from the force 3 weeks later. She never found out what happened to the girl. But years later, just before her death, Clara gave a recorded statement to her niece. Her final words, that girl wasn't hiding. She was guarding something. Next, a government contractor sent to demolish the Elbridge discovers the bricks aren't just old, they're pulsing. In 1969, after decades of complaints from Pine residents, the county approved demolition of the old Elbridge well. It stood at the edge of a decaying family plot, overgrown and used and long sealed with rusted chains. The contractor sent was Walter Greaves, a Tennessee man with a background in military engineering. Greaves was practical, experienced. He didn't spook easy until he touched the brickwork. The well was wrong. The bricks weren't just old. They were warm, and they hummed. Greaves placed his hand against the base, and he swore he could feel a slow, rhythmic pulse like a heartbeat. He told himself it was groundwater vibration or deep heat pockets. But then he chipped at one of the bricks and it bled. Dark liquid seeped from the crack. Not water, not oil. Something viscous and black-red. It smelled faintly of wet iron and herbs. Walter backed away. He phoned in the first stage report. The very next morning, a temporary work stoppage was issued and his contract was canceled, with no explanation. He left Pine not within 24 hours, but the nightmares followed. In interviews decades later, Walter described the dreams. I'm always falling, not down a hole, but sideways, like the earth's been turned, and I'm sinking through layers of bone, teeth, and roots. Something's always waiting at the bottom, smiling with someone else's face. Local kids dared each other to get close to the well, but most didn't. By 1973, a second fence had been erected, this one not by the county, but by a private firm. No logo, no identification, just a worn warning nailed to a tree. They drank from her. Now she draws back. The area around the well became dead earth. No birds, no insects, not even weeds. In 1975, a botanist from Ohio State took a soil sample from the perimeter. He published a quiet report in a regional journal, noting, "The pH levels here are incompatible with life. Soil appears decades dead, but recently disturbed like something fed beneath it." His report was pulled from archives within 6 months. He died in a house fire the following year. The breakthrough came in 1977, not from any institution or official source, but from a break-in at the abandoned Elbridge homestead. A group of college students chasing legends entered the house one autumn night. Most of what they found had rotted, furniture collapsed, wallpaper peeled, the air thick with mildew and mold. But in the attic, beneath loose floorboards, they found a ledger wrapped in deerskin. The pages were filled with cramped feminine handwriting and dated from 1894 to 1921. The front page was titled the vessel's book, Sacred Womb, Sacred Root. Each entry was signed only with initials SEMET, but they all followed the same pattern. First came an account of a ritual cleansing, often in cold water or soil. Then a name, usually male. Then a phrase, he was taken. The line is pure. I remain open. Page after page, dozens of them. The girls had not run away. They had not died of illness or misfortune. They had been taken, and the women had recorded it like inventory. One chilling passage from 1903. Elijah would not stop crying. His eyes turned gray too soon. We wrapped him in river vine and returned him to the well. I bled for 7 days after. Sister said, that was holy. Another from 1918. Thomas bore the mark too early. His teeth came in black. We sang until the roots stopped twitching. The final entry from 1921 was shorter, more desperate. No more boys left. The seed withers. Sister says, we wait for the next one born with the breath. We keep the house and we listen through the trees. Who? These sisters will remain unknown, but analysis of the handwriting revealed it was at least 3 different women, likely over several decades. When the students reported the find, the ledger disappeared within a week. They were told it had been misfiled, but one student, Jody Ramsey, made a full photocopy, and Leah shared it with a fringe historical review. Her conclusion, the Elbridge women weren't victims. They weren't followers. They were the keepers, and they documented every burial like a sacrament. Next, a man. Researching Appalachian fertility, Folklore links the Elbridge line to a far older pre-colonial legend and a creature called Mother Root. In 1980, a folklorist from West Virginia University named Dr. Lyle Ransom published a controversial thesis, The Rooted Womb, Appalachian Fertility, and the Legend of the Earth Mother. Tucked deep in his research was a disturbing connection to the Elbridge family. Dr. Ransom claimed that long before European settlers, the region now known as McCreary County, had been home to a cultic fertility practice centered around an entity known only as Mother. Root. She wasn't a goddess, not in the classical sense. She was something. Older, hungrier. She demanded offerings from the soil, not crops or coins. But bloodline. The earth is not just land, he wrote. In Appalachian myth, it is a breathing archive of names, faces, sins, and wombs. To grow something sacred, you had to bury something sacred. Ransom connected oral tales from Shawnee and Melundian communities with the Elbridge lineage, tracing a specific phrase, repeated in each. The one who bears the mark must return to feed the root. The mark, he proposed, referred to children born under strange signs, black teeth, gray eyes, bone deformities, or unexplainable early speech. In local law, these children weren't seen as cursed, but as chosen and ultimately sacrificed. More disturbingly, Ransom uncovered burial records from as early as 1849, showing that Elbridge infants were buried with their umbilical cords still attached, a highly specific detail found. In similar fertility cults worldwide, in one case, the record simply said, born breathing, buried, twitching. The folklorists believed the Elbridge. Women were preservers of this ancient rite, having inherited the knowledge through isolation, oral tradition, and ritual journals like the vessel's ledger. After publishing his findings, Ransom's academic reputation was shredded. His colleagues mocked him. Grants dried up. Within a year, he resigned, ed from the university. He moved into a trailer near the Elbridge land where he was last seen in 1982. When officials searched for him, they found no body, only a circle of dried vines tied with baby teeth hanging from the trees and a single chilling note pinned to the trailer door. She's still hungry. It was easy to assume the Elbridge tragedies were just part of the harsh Appalachian life. Poor health care, isolated births, infant mortality. But by 1983, medical records pulled from state archives revealed something else. A pattern, a 5-generation sequence of miscarriages, infant deformities, and unnatural births, all logged by a rotating circle of 4 midwives, each one noted for serving only the Elbridge. Women, none had licenses, none worked in hospitals, and every one of them stopped, practicing within months of delivering a child who was never seen again. The earliest recorded midwife, Granny Elsie, assisted with births from 1898 to 1910. She wrote in her notes, "The girls bleed too early and the babies come too silent. But they always say the same thing. He was not for keeping." In 1934, midwife Lottie Green documented the birth of a child named Ephraim Elbridge. He was born with 4 fused fingers on each hand and teeth already erupted. He died 36 hours later, according to the official record. But in the margins of her journal, Lottie wrote, "The mother did not cry. She smiled. She said, 'The root will drink deep tonight.'" As investigators reinterred descendants and dug deeper into family correspondence, one horrifying truth emerged. No male Elbridge child had survived past age 7 in over 100 red years. They weren't buried in cemeteries. They weren't on any census after infancy. They vanished, but someone had to help make them vanish. That's where the midwives came in. They weren't just birth attendants. They were gatekeepers delivering, diagnosing, and handing over any marked child to the women of the house. When one midwife, Annalise Ward, retired in 1952, her daughter recalled she wouldn't deliver for anyone else. Said her hands were bound by earth and blood. "When I was 10, I saw her bury a baby, doll wrapped in hog's hids. She said it wasn't pretend." By the 1970s, no midwives remained. All 4 had died or disappeared without public obituary. But old phone directories list their final addresses, all within a 10 miles radius of the Elbridge home. Next, a devastating fire reveals hidden graves beneath the orchard, and the soil refuses to grow again. In the summer of 1984, an unseasonably dry lightning storm sparked a fire in McCreary County. It swept through brush and grassland, but came to a violent halt at one eerie place, the old Elbridge orchard. Locals who arrived to help douse the flames describe a stench unlike anything natural, not burning wood or leaves, but something sweeter, rotting, fleshy. What the fire revealed would haunt the community forever. Beneath the orchard soil, in neatly spaced rows, were human remains. Tiny, ones, dozens of them. Infant skulls, rib cages the size of birds, some with metal. Tags sewn into the fabric that still clung to bone. Forensic analysis by state authorities later estimated over 40 infant and toddler remains dating from roughly 1880 to 1975. A few were natural deaths, likely still, births or disease, but many bore fractures to sternum and dislocated spines, indicating intentional trauma. One child's bones were fused to iron nails driven through a wooden box that had been buried vertically. Worse yet, botanists examining the soil after the fire found something chilling. The land had been repeatedly saturated with calcium and iron consistent with blood, and marrow breakdown. No plant can root in the spot again without extreme chemical remediation. The ground is ruined. Locals say that orchard had been planted by Mary Beth Elbridge herself back in 1867, and that only Elbridge women ever picked from its trees. Pears, apples, cherries, all known for their deep sweet flavor, but all died after the fire. A photo taken by a volunteer firefighter, now buried in public archives, shows 3 burned trees still standing in the center of the orchard. At the base of one, carved into blackened bark, are faint scorched words: womb, root, return. No tools were found nearby, no footprints, and the writing was on the inside of the tree's hollow, not the outside. Investigators couldn't explain how anyone could carve inward. They stopped asking. Her name was Lenora Elbridge, and by 1985, she was the last living female bearing the Elbridge name. She was only 43, but looked closer to 70. She rarely left the house, never answered the phone, and when social workers came by after the fire, they found her sitting in a rocking chair, whispering nursery rhymes to no one. But behind her quiet decay, there was something else, a locked bedroom, one that no one, not even the state, was allowed to enter. Her neighbors recalled hearing the sound of a child crying from the house during storms. Always storms. One man said he knocked once during heavy rain to offer her help and heard a child's voice call, "Don't let her cut me again." But Lenora lived alone. No birth records, no adoption papers, and no one ever saw a child come or go. Eventually, state authorities got a warrant. What they found inside that room was unspeakable. A child, approximately 8 years old, malnourished, mute, and covered in ritual scars. The boy had a cleft palate that had never been treated, a partially fused arm, and burn marks consistent with branding. Tools. He was seated in a hand-carved wooden crib far too small for his age, surrounded by clumps of dried herbs and small cloth dolls impaled with pins. On the wall was painted the phrase, "He lives because she sinned." Under questioning, Lenora admitted, "He was born under the wrong moon. I tried to fix him." Mama said, "We don't bury the broken ones anymore. We keep them near. He listens better now." She believed the boy was the spirit rebirth of her brother, who had drowned in 1950 under stars. Psychiatrists deemed her mentally unfit for trial, but the boy, whose true name was never confirmed, was placed into state care, given the name James. He never spoke a word, not even once. Years later, a nurse who worked with him would write anonymously. He never cried, but never laughed, but he'd stare at trees like they were whispering to him. Once, during a full moon, he carved 3 names into his pillow with his fingernail. Lenora Elbridge, return. Next, we uncover the sealed diary of Mary Beth Elbridge and the secret oath that started it all. In the autumn of 1986, after Lenora was committed, the Elbridge home was finally cleared. Amidst boxes of faded quilts and rotting hymnals, authorities found something buried inside a false bottom chest. A Diary bound in cowhide, pages brittle but intact. The handwriting was dated, precise, and the first page bore a signature in ink, dark as dried blood. Mary Beth Elbridge, October 3rd, 1871. It wasn't a diary in the typical sense. It was a ledger of rituals, births, and punishments, a record of doctrine passed. From mother to daughter for over a century. The first entries were strange, but not alarming. My son took sick. Today, the fever is rising. I placed lamb's ash under his tongue and tied his hands. If he dies, I will root his body beneath the trees. Later entries grew darker. The seventh child was born in red moonlight. His eyes did not open, and he breathed backward. I took it as a sign. He is to be preserved until she returns. Preserved. That word came up again and again. It became clear the Elbridge women did not bury all their dead. Some were embalmed in primitive, unsanctified ways and hidden in cellars under root cellars, even in trees. Her skin did not spoil. Mary Beth wrote of one daughter. She stays soft when bathed in willow water and prayer. But the diary held one passage that investigators could barely believe. The first oath was taken beneath the black moon. I offered blood in my own womb, and the trees drank it well. From this line forward, each daughter must reserve one child, one root, one sorrow. That line, each daughter must preserve one child, is what horrified forensic teams when they returned to search the orchard again. They didn't find graves this time. They found sealed wooden containers hidden inside hollow tree trunks, and inside preserved remains of infants, toddlers, and even one teenage girl. Hair still braided, skin pale and taut like wax. The preservation was almost ritualistic embalming, but using herbs, alcohol, and something else that tests couldn't easily identify. Whatever it was, it kept flesh from rotting for decades. Each box was carved with names, often feminine, and a single word beneath, offered. In 1986, after discovering Mary Beth's diary and the preserved bodies in the orchard trees, officials obtained clearance to dig beneath the main house. The cellar was known, but what lay beneath it had been hidden for over a century. A hatch was discovered under the stone floor, sealed shut with rusted iron rods and waxy residue. When pried open, it exhaled air, so cold and pungent one officer vomited immediately. Inside was a chamber, stone, walls, dirt floor, no light. The temperature stayed unnaturally low, as if the room itself resisted decay, and at the far end was what looked like an altar, but not a religious one. It was a preservation table carved from dark hickory, with soaked in black stains that no one dared test. Lining the walls were wooden shelves, each bearing glass jars and cloth-wrapped bundles. Jars contained unknown liquids with suspended organic material, bits of hair, bone, fragments, and in one a fully formed infant hand still clenched. The cloth bundles held more than investigators could stomach. A pair of preserved baby shoes, still damp with unknown fluid. A child's jawbone with what looked like stitched flesh still clinging. A rosary, but instead of beads, it was strung with milk teeth. But what broke even the toughest officers was the last discovery. A preserved body, female, approximately 12 years old, hair braided, dress intact, skin pale, elastic, as if only recently deceased. But tests showed she had died sometime, around 1910. Pinned to her chest was a scrap of parchment with 2 words, Bloodroot Daughter. Forensics couldn't explain how the body had been kept so intact. No refrigeration, no known embalming chemicals, just ritual secrecy and silence. This chamber had not been used recently, but it had been maintained. Cobwebs were cleared, candles replaced. It was as if someone, even in recent years, a Tim had come here to remember or to continue. Next, we discover how the Elbridge women passed down this ritual from mother to daughter, and what happened when one child refused in every generation a girl was chosen, often the eldest daughter, to continue the Elbridge ritual. It wasn't offered, it was expected, And when Nora Elbridge, born in 1931, came of age, she became the next in line. But Nora was different. Where her mother, Ruth, was devout and soft-spoken, Nora was sharp, questioning and drawn to the outside world. She read books, secretly wrote poems. She begged to go to school. And when she finally did, she flourished. She told friends her family was just old-fashioned, but the truth was far worse. At home, she was being prepared for the preservation, right? It began on her 14th birthday. A lamb was slaughtered in the orchard. Its blood was collected in a wooden bowl. She was told to bathe in it. When she refused, her mother locked her in the root cellar for 3 days. You must understand, Ruth told her calmly through the door. Your womb is the garden. It must give and it must take. Nora screamed until her voice gave out. In her secret diary, discovered decades later on the floorboards, Nora described the rituals in chilling detail. They want me to carry one. Not raise it, not love it, just birth it, then preserve it. They say the family dies if the bloodline is not sealed in. Sorrow, I will not be my mother's vessel. I will not be my sister's grave. At 16, Nora ran away, disappeared into Tennessee. For years, the family told neighbors she'd gone to a cousin's farm out west. Some believed she'd died. Others suspected she'd simply escaped. But what no one expected was what Nora would become. In 1974, she returned under a different name, not as an Elbridge, but as a social worker, and she had one goal, to stop the ritual before another girl was chosen. By the late 1970s, Nora had been working quietly under an alias for years, placing herself in social services, targeting rural Appalachian communities. She never used the name Elbridge again, but she knew the signs, the patterns. She wasn't just looking for abuse. She was looking for ritual. And when reports came in from Clear Hollow County, whispers of a girl named Anna kept home from school, seen bruised, never speaking. Nora knew the cycle had begun again. She filed a request for a welfare check. But when she visited the Elbridge homestead, still under the care of Mary Beth, now an old woman, she wasn't recognized. The compound was empty of children. I've no little ones here, Mary Beth said, smiling gently. Just me and the Lord. But Nora didn't believe it. She returned days later alone after hours and broke into the cellar door. What she found would never be officially recorded. Inside, she discovered fresh evidence. A girl's dress hanging near the altar, still damp. 2 new jars filled with clear fluid. A child's name, Anna, carved into a wooden beam, newly scratched. Nora took photos, wrote everything down, and that night she mailed a parcel to a trusted colleague in Lexington, Kentucky, containing her notes, the photos, and a letter marked, "If anything happens to me, this is why." The next morning, her body was found on the roadside near the Elbridge orchard, ruled a hit and run. No witnesses, no suspects, no investigation. Her notes never reached the colleague. The package had been intercepted and never resurfaced. But one thing did survive. Underneath the cellar, tucked behind loose stones, was a hidden iron box. Inside was Nora's second diary, a last entry written hours before her death. They don't preserve bodies. They preserve obedience, but rot always rises. And when it does, I hope someone remembers men by I name Nora Elbridge, the one who said no. Next, we trace how Nora's diary made its way into the hands of a modern researcher, and why the Elbridge land has never been developed. In 1989, nearly 15 years after Nora Elbridge's mysterious death, a local contractor named Royce Halter was hired to clear brush near the old Elbridge property line, a job no one else wanted. The land had sat untouched for decades. The soil was rich, the air heavy with stillness. But the locals said bad things grew in that dirt. Royce didn't believe in haunted land, but while clearing vines around a foundation of the original smokehouse, his boot struck iron. At first, He thought it was part of the old furnace, but after digging a little deeper, he unearthed a sealed iron box, rusted but intact. He brought it to the sheriff's office in nearby Gorman Hollow. Inside, they found a small brown, leather-bound journal for black and white photographs, clearly from the 1970s, a lock of child's hair tied with blue ribbon, a torn welfare services badge under the name N. Elbridge, and on the first page of the diary, in shaky, cursive, this is a truth they would not keep buried. The diary, now known as the Elbridge Testament, detailed nearly 3 decades of ritual, abuse, and secrecy. It included names, dates, ritual, instructions, and entries about girls who never appeared in official school records, but were preserved. Investigators began quietly tracing the names. At least 9 children were confirmed missing between 1940 and 1975, all last seen near Elbridge land. But only one body was ever recovered. That body belonged to Anna Ray Clevens, age 9, reported missing in 1976. She was found buried in a clay pit preserved unnaturally, embalmed, sealed, in wax, wrapped in linen. No coffin, just roots growing around her, face like fingers. The cause of death was never confirmed. The discovery of Nora's journal sparked quiet panic. The property was officially condemned. The Elbridge name was scrubbed from most county records. The local Jeep boys harassing Eagle Sagan Overman bought the land under a dummy trust. Construction permits were permanently blocked. To this day, the area is known locally as the Quiet Hollow. No one builds, no one farms, and no one stays after sundown. Inside Nora's diary, one repeated phrase stood out, always written in red ink. They are not buried, they are kept. It appeared dozens of times, sometimes beside names, sometimes beside measurements, sometimes alone on entire pages. Investigators dubbed it the preservation theory. But it wasn't just a metaphor. According to Nora, the Elbridges believed in a warped generational commandment, a blood right, passed down orally, never written, whispered only to daughters. It stated, death is a decay of the disobedient. The obedient may remain. If flesh is sealed and spirit spoken to, the body shall not rot, but remain clean for judgment. This belief led to a grotesque practice. Children who obeyed without question were preserved. Disobedient ones were released, often disappeared with no trace. No graves, no stones, just silence. Nora's diary included hand-drawn diagrams of the preparation table, ingredients used in sealing the bodies, and a chilling recipe for purity wax, a combination of animal fat, herbs, crushed chalk, and ash. She wrote, they dress the girls like dolls, comb their hair. They pray over them until morning, then seal the mouth, the eyes, the ears, not to silence them, but to keep them from hearing the world again. One journal entry dated May the 12th, 1968. They preserved Ruth, age 8. She had memorized all of Psalm 23. They said she never asked questions. She just smiled. Ruth's name appeared on a missing persons report from 1969. Last seen playing near the creek behind the Elbridge orchard. She was never found. And then there was Esther Elbridge, the last known child born to the family before the dissolution of the homestead. Now in her 60s, Esther lives under a protected identity. She spoke once in a 2004 documentary, Never, publicly aired and whispered. They said it was love, but love doesn't smell like vet, nigger, and wax. Love doesn't make you sleep beside your sister's glass eyes. Next, we uncover what Esther remembered from the night of the last ritual and why she believes the land still remembers every name it swallowed. In the only known footage of her testimony, Esther Elbridge sits in a plain room with drawn curtains. Her hands are folded. Her voice is barely above a whisper. She does not cry. She does not tremble, but her stillness says more than any words could. The interviewer asks, "What happened the night it ended?" Esther stares for a long moment, then quietly replies, "It didn't end. They just stopped calling it ritual. She describes the last night she spent at the Elbridge house around late 1975, or early 76. She would have been about 9. That evening, her older cousin May had been chosen for completion. The room smelled of wax and cedar. Chalk circles were drawn on the floor. Everyone had to wear white. No shoes. She remembers Nora, standing near the back, holding a Bible that was so worn it looked gray. Her grandfather sat in a high-backed chair with his eyes closed, murmuring something. Maiden cry. She smiled at Esther and said, "Don't forget my song." Then she lay on the table. Esther said. Her mother whispered a prayer, not in English, not quite Latin. One by one, the family kissed May's forehead and turned their backs, but Esther refused. She stood watching until her mother's hand pushed her aside. Later that night, she crept back into the cellar. May's body was gone. Only the scent of wax lingered, and a small red ribbon sat in the corner, tucked behind a jar of bone. Ash! Esther took it. Years later, in a police interview, she confessed she still has the ribbon. She keeps it sealed in glass, hidden in a storage unit. She says it smells like Sunday candles and vinegar. She also told them that night the ground outside the house was wet, but it hadn't rained in days. Something had soaked up through the earth like the land was leaking. To this day, Esther refuses to go near Gorman Hollow. She claims she hears May's humming in dreams, the song she told her not to forget. After Esther's confession, authorities made a formal attempt to excavate what they believed was the Elbridge family burial site, a shallow moss-covered plot at the back edge of the former homestead, half swallowed by Appalachian brush. Locals had long called it the quiet patch. No animals grazed near it. No wildflowers grew, just low, colorless grass that never seemed to die or grow. But something halted the dig before it could even begin. In 2006, the Tennessee Historical Preservation Office intervened. They cited a clause buried deep within 19th century land rights deeds tied to an obscure religious exemption law, one of the last of its kind in the state. The land was legally protected as a site of cultural spiritual significance, and, under that law, no excavation could occur without consent from a living descendant of the Elbridge line. And Esther, she refused. Digging won't change anything, she told them. You don't wake sleeping things just to prove they're dead. Still, investigators were persistent. They attempted non-invasive scans. Ground-penetrating radar detected several irregular voids about child-size and perfect rows. No metal, no coffins, just shadows beneath the earth. One technician said, "It's like someone wanted them to be remembered, but never found." A second scan 6 months later showed something stranger. One of the voids had shifted, as if whatever had been below was no longer there. Then came the reports. Visitors to the quiet patch claimed to hear humming. Some described the faint smell of wax or vinegar in the air. One deputy said he saw what looked like a child's handprint on the back of his cruiser after leaving the site, smudged into the dust of the rear window. No, children had been there. In 2011, the Elbridge land was sold off in parcels, but no one would touch the quiet patch. It remains fenced with a weathered sign reading, "By order of heaven and heritage, do not disturb." It's still there, unmarked and excavated, and utterly still. Next, we follow a local historian who believes the Elbridge rituals didn't end. They just moved deeper into the mountains. In 2017, Dr. Marion Coates, a folklorist and local historian from Knoxville, published a paper titled Bloodlines in the Soil, Appellation, Ritual and Rural Legacy. It barely made a ripple in the academic world, but in the small shadow corners of Gorman County, it sparked a quiet panic. Dr. Coates had spent nearly 10 years gathering records, testimonies, and oral histories, most of them linked, however faintly, to the Elbridge family. And her conclusion: the rituals didn't stop. They simply went deeper into the hollers, the caves, the parts no one maps anymore. She identified at least 3 other Communities spread across the Smoky Mountains were surnames related to. Elbridge cousins appeared in census logs. Each had the same pattern, a higher than average child mortality rate. Land deeds with religious exemptions. Multiple. Generations living on isolated plots. No official burials, just private grounds. One location outside of a place called Hollow Ridge reported 4 disappearances between 1993 and 2004. All children, all unsolved. The families refused interviews. A retired nurse who'd worked in the area told Dr. Coates, "We weren't supposed to ask questions about them, especially not about the babies born small and sickly. They were just gone by the next spring." Coates also uncovered a series of photographs taken by a park ranger in 1981 of hand-dug altars inside a mountain, cave lined with scorched rocks and melted candles. The strange part, symbols on the cave walls matched the chalk markings Esther Elbridge had described from her childhood. Her research concluded with a chilling hypothesis. The Elbridge family did not die out. It scattered like spores. But before her work could gain real traction, something happened. Dr. Coates vanished in late 2018. She was reported missing by her partner. Her car was found near the stay-to-park border. Inside her laptop, a sealed envelope, addressed to be opened if I am gone, and a child's red ribbon. The envelope was never made public. Her disappearance was ruled inconclusive, but some believe she got too close, not to a myth, but to something still alive. Next, we return to Esther one final time and the last interview she ever gave before vanishing from public view. By the time Esther Elbridge sat down for her final recorded interview in 2019, she was 86 years old. Her hair had turned snow white, but her voice still carried the crisp, clipped authority of someone who'd spent a lifetime choosing silence. She didn't grant interviews easily and never gave her real name. But this one was different. The audio was later leaked anonymously to an online archive of Appalachian oral histories. It begins with a question. Why now, Esther? Why speak after all this time? Her answer, because the soil still remembers. And I'm tired of pretending it doesn't. What followed was a 43-minute recording. The first 10 minutes are nearly inaudible. Her voice trembles as she names names. Sarah Elbridge, Nora, Ruth, Jeremiah. She confirms what had long been suspected. Yes, the preservation right was real. Yes, she watched it happen. Yes, she saw when it preserved. The interviewer asks cautiously, "What did it look like?" Esther goes silent, then whispers, "It didn't look dead. That's what I remember most. It looked like it was still waiting." Esther claims she left the homestead in 1955, not long after Nora vanished again. She changed her name, moved to Ohio, and tried to start over. But she says the dreams never stopped. I still see the root cellar. I still hear Ruth praying over that thing. I still smell the salt and lye. Then something chilling. Esther says she recently received a letter. No return address. No signature. Inside was just one sentence, written in her mother's handwriting. The bloodline has not ended, and wrapped in tissue paper, a lock of jet black baby hair, tied in a red ribbon. She ends the interview with a single warning. They don't need the mountain anymore. They don't need the cellar or the salt. They only need a willing womb. And those are easier to find than you think. Esther disappeared 3 weeks later. Her apartment was found undisturbed. No forced entry. No signs of struggle. Her neighbors claim she just walked out one night, and ill and never came back. Some say she was taken. Others say she returned willingly. Either way, the bloodline remains unbroken. Next, we trace the legacy of the Elbridges, left behind and why some say the ritual is quietly evolving. After Esther vanished, rumors spread like wildfire across the small towns tucked along the Appalachian spine. Locals, the older ones, said they'd heard whispers again, not from people, from the woods, from the wells, from the dirt. Some swore. They saw a woman who looked just like Ruth Elbridge walking barefoot along a dry creek bed long after sundown. But that's folklore. What happened next was far more chilling and verifiable. In 2021, a research assistant at a university archive in Kentucky digitized a box of handwritten ledgers from the mid-century. Inside were birthing records, hundreds of them, mostly routine, except for 8 births logged to a single surname, Elbridge, in the 1970s and 80s. But here's the thing. No hospital, no attending physician, no death records, and no follow-up documentation, no school enrollments, social security numbers, or burial entries. These children were born on paper and then vanished. And worse, every birth was marked with the same postscript, preserved in tradition, name withheld by maternal request. Local officials claimed it was a clerical anomaly, but an internal memo leaked by a whistleblower told a different story. Patent appears deliberate. Cross-checking land records suggests all maternal entries linked to properties once owned by or adjacent to the Elbridge estate. Possible generational ritual activity. Recommend escalation. That memo was buried within weeks. The whistleblower fired, moved out of state, never gave another interview. But here's where things take a modern, far more disturbing turn. In 2023, a midwife in rural West Virginia posted anonymously on a dark forum for trauma care professionals. She described being contracted for a private home birth outside of Beckley. The family, polite, quiet, deeply religious, insisted on no questions, no paperwork, and no outside contacts. They paid in cash, but what she saw stayed with her. The baby wasn't for them. It was for something somewhere else. They called it a vessel for the sealed one. She left midway through the job. A week later, she received a package. Inside was her missing stethoscope and a lock of jet black infant hair tied in red ribbon. She moved to Michigan within the month. Whatever the Elbridge family began in the 1800s didn't die with Ruth or with Nora or even with Esther. It adapted. Modern names, modern methods, new wounds. But the same old tradition. Preserve the line at any cost. By 2024, the Elbridge homestead had long been declared abandoned, though no one local dead stepped onto property, but a drone hobbyist from Pennsylvania, fascinated by Appalachian ghost towns, decided to do what no one else would, fly a reconnaissance drone over the Elbridge ruins and into the underground. He launched from a roadside clearing at sunrise. The footage starts normal enough, a sweeping view of the hollow, overgrown with bramble and vines. The crumbling chimney stack still juts out like a gravestone, but it's the cellar doors, 2 warped wooden panels sunken into the ground that drew his focus. He descended the drone gently. The cellar doors had been cracked open barely an inch. Someone or something had entered, or never left. The drone's light pierced the cellar. The walls were stone, still solid. A set of stairs curved into earth, and at the base, something unexpected. A stone, altar circular, cracked, covered in ash and bone fragments. Around it, a ring of handprints, small, almost childlike, charred into the floorboards. The drone hovered lower. There was movement. Something shifted beneath the stone slab. Not an animal, not wind. Breath. A single puff of white air escaped from the base of the altar, like an exhale through damp rock. Then the drone's feed. Cut. At first, the operator assumed signal loss. He drove closer to reconnect. But when he got within 50 feet of the clearing, every one of his electronics, car, phone, remote, shut, down, dead. No battery loss, just drained. When he walked toward the drone site on foot, he found only this. The remote control fried, the drone body shattered, and carved into a nearby tree the word return. He didn't. He sold his gear, deleted his channel, moved out of state. But the footage he uploaded before the cut remains online, reposted by digital, archivists and concert forums. It lasts 3 minutes and 47 seconds. And in the final frame before blackness, if you pause it just right, a small, Handprint appears in the upper left corner of the screen from inside the lens. The cellar was never re-explored, and the stone altar still down there just waiting. The Elbridge family story was supposed to be over by the 1960s, but buried in the archives of Riverview State Psychiatric Hospital 90 miles from Elbridge Hollow lay a set of patient records marked child admission unaccompanied, no known family wandering. Road T83 near Elk Run. The boy's name was Jacob, estimated age 11. He was nonverbal when admitted, underweight, skin pale, fingernails caked with soil. What caught the attention of one-night nurse, however, wasn't his silence. It was his drawings. Every day, Jacob used charcoal to draw the same thing on brown hospital paper, a crumbling farmhouse surrounded by trees, always the same crooked porch, always a figure in the upstairs window. At first, staff assumed trauma, but after one orderly noticed the symbol Jacob etched beneath every house, A, shaped like an upside-down V with a dot in the center, the doctor began digging. A social worker eventually drove Jacob back to the area where he was found, hoping to trigger memory. When they passed through old Elbridge territory, the boy sat bolt upright. He began screaming, not crying, not panicked, screaming one name over and over. Mara. Back at Riverview, Jacob finally spoke barely above a whisper. He said she was the one in the dark. He said she walks backwards and lives behind the stone. And worst of all, that she watches to the walls of wherever you sleep. When asked who Mara was, he said only, "My family put her there." An evaluation team reviewed the case and dismissed it as delusional folklore. Jacob was labeled with early-onset schizophrenia and transferred to a long-term children's unit. He died 2 years later of respiratory complications. No autopsy was performed, but in the final log entry by his attending psychiatrist, one note remained. Patient spoke clearly in final days, repeated the phrase, "It's in our bones." No ow. Said he saw Mar outside the window, watching, always watching. Said the dirt wouldn't stop her this time. Years later, a nurse who'd once treated Jacob wrote a memoir. In it, she described one quiet evening. Jacob had given her one final drawing. Unlike the rest, it didn't show the house. It showed bones wrapped in roots, growing downward, not up, in the center, the same symbol and a black figure. Beneath the earth, arms outstretched. Next, we return to 1892, to the journal of Asa Elbridge, the family's last living male heir, and discover what he buried before, disappearing forever. In the spring of 1892, Asa Elbridge, the final surviving male of the original Elbridge bloodline, penned a journal no one was meant to read. It was found in 1978 by a demolition crew, clearing what remained of the Elbridge family chapel, a stone structure crumbling into the hillside, long overtaken by roots. Behind a false wall, inside a rusted tin box, the journal had survived fire, moisture, and time. The handwriting was uneven, as though the writer's hands were trembling, or worse. It began, plainly, "I write this in fear not of man, but of what we kept alive for too long." Asa confessed that the Elbridges had never believed their blood would rot. They thought it was protected, preserved. They called it a covenant of earth, passed from father to son through sacred rituals of reunion. What Asa described wasn't devotion. It was incest. It was containment. The children were not raised. They were planted, buried in soil, sometimes for hours, mouths filled with ash and roots, until they could hear her properly. Her Asa called her by name over and over in the journal, sometimes as a goddess, sometimes a curse. He claimed she had been born human centuries before in the very valley the Elbridges came to claim, a bastard child left for dead who rose from the soil when the rains failed, and when they tried to burn her, she did not scream. She smiled. The land, Asa wrote, was never theirs. It had always been hers, and the only way to keep her asleep was through Elbridge blood. Each generation had to feed her, through union, through death, through silence. But Asa was the first to break. He wrote, I saw what was left of Mary. Her eyes were not eyes. She had no mouth. But I heard her say, "You kept me too long." The roots came through her fingers. She never bled. And then he ended with this: "I cannot kill her, but I can stop the... See, I will never lie with my kin. I will burn the bones of the children, and I will bury myself far from this hollow. No grave was ever found for Asa. Elbridge, just a boot uncovered by a hunter in 1947, still laced tight with A. Single shin bone inside, burned black. By the winter of 1904, the Elbridge name had thinned out, not by chance, but by Asa's refusal to cede the line. However, his surviving cousin, a woman named Naomi Elbridge, remained in the hollow, isolated and unwed. But Naomi had not broken the pact. She had a child. No record showed a father's name. The town clerk's book simply marked infant male born of Naomi Elbridge, eyes black, no cry. The baby, locals whispered, was not right. His skin was gray in his eyes. Never blinked. One woman, a midwife named Mrs. Harland, refused to speak of the delivery until her death in 1933. But in her private diary, she wrote, "That child was not born. It came up." Naomi raised a boy whom she named Hiram without showing him to anyone outside the hollow. But the wood sore, and by 1912, strange reports began again, first from travelers who said the trees moved wrong, and then from a nearby farm family who found a ring of children's teeth in their field laid, carefully in a perfect circle. The hollow was sick again, and Naomi knew what had to be done. Following the rites passed down from her grandmother, she prepared the offering. But unlike the others, this time it was not a stranger nor a child taken from a distant place. It was Hiram himself. At just 8 years old, he was led into the family chapel, the one Asa had tried to destroy. Naomi brought with her a single candle and a wooden box containing 3 things: a bundle of ash, a cloth soaked in her own blood, and a locket containing a curl of hair from Mara's grave. In the final documented rite of the Elbridge family, Naomi recited the words, "In blood through ash beneath, bone in silence, not birth, we return her home." Hiram was buried alive beneath the floorboards, and when she placed a candle atop the ground and sealed the chapel, the flame did not flicker. It burned steady, bright, and it never went out. Even decades later, when the chapel was found again, collapsed, overgrown, reeking of mold, a faint scent of burnt sugar still lingered in the soil. Locals called that place Sweet Hollow, but it never bore fruit. Nothing ever grew there again. Next, we follow the disturbing rediscovery of Hiram's resting place and the terrifying evidence that something under the chapel is still alive. In the autumn of 1986, 2 university students from Asheville, Claire Morton and Daniel Bly, were conducting an independent project on Appalachian folk burial sites. They were searching for remnants of unmarked religious structures used in rural rituals. Local rumor led them to a thickly wooded tract near the old Elbridge boundary. It was barely a clearing, just rot, briars, and half-sunken stones. But in the center, buried under ivy and damp moss, they found it, a collapsed chapel long forgotten. Its beams were nearly all caved in, and the earth had shifted from years of erosion. But what caught Claire's eye wasn't a structure. It was a smell. She described it later in her field notes, like syrup, rotting flowers, and burnt hair. I've been around graves. This wasn't decomposition. This was preserved. Digging through one side wall, they discovered a half-exposed cavity beneath. The floorboards, just enough room for a child body. Claire initially thought it might be a coffin, but there was no wood, no stone, just packed dirt. And right in the center, sitting upright and untouched by time, was the candle. Still there, still intact. Its wick looked fresh, as if lit just days ago, despite being buried for what should have been nearly 74 years. Daniel, against Claire's protest, reached toward the hole. The moment his fingers brushed the soil, something moved. He later said it felt like the dirt exhaled, a sudden warm breath rushing out of the ground and curling around his wrist. Terrified, they left the site, but they didn't leave alone. Within days, Daniel fell ill. Fevers, night sweats. He claimed to hear a voice, whispering in Appalachian German, saying, "Bring him back. Blood owes blood." Claire began seeing small handprints on the inside of her dorm window, even on the third floor, and twice she found strands of hair in her backpack, ash blonde, fine, curling at the ends. They returned to Sweet Hollow with a local historian who insisted on documenting the site before disturbing anything further. But when they arrived, the chapel was gone. Not destroyed, gone. All that remained was an unnaturally perfect clearing, dead silent. No birds, no bugs, just a strange pattern etched into the soil like roots, but too symmetrical, too deliberate. Claire described it as a cradle made of veins. The project was abandoned. The footage was never released, and Daniel dropped out of school within the year. Claire went on to write a private paper titled Inheritance of Soil, The Haunting Lineage of the Elbridge Hollow. It has never been made public. Her name was Marjorie Elbridge, though in later records she went by Marjorie Stone, a name chosen not for anonymity, but for protection. Born in 1943 to a woman who refused to speak the Elbridge name aloud, Marjorie spent most of her childhood in a boarding school far from Sweet Hollow, yet something always tugged at her. Dreams, whispers, a constant ache in her bones that worsened around the time of the blood moon each year. In 1992, long after the events with Claire and Daniel, Marjorie was contacted by an estate lawyer. An anonymous client had transferred ownership of a remote Appalachian parcel to her name. She already knew what it was. Against every sane instinct, Marjorie returned. She wore a cross. She carried salt. She even fasted for 7 days beforehand, rituals passed down in fragments from her mother. But when she arrived at the old Elbridge land, none of that mattered. The ground still knew her. There was no chapel now, no house. But standing in the clearing where the vein cradle had once been, she saw a figure waiting. An old man with sunken eyes, hair like dry wheat, and a lopsided smile that spread far too wide. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. Marjorie dropped to her knees and wept, not from fear, but from recognition. That night, in the ashes of the Elbridge curse, Marjorie made a choice. She set a fire, not to destroy, but to contain. She burned everything, the old soil, her own blood-written letters, family Bibles, written in a language no longer spoken, and even locks of her own hair she'd found braided into bones beneath the roots of the oldest tree on the property. And as the smoke rose, something screamed, not with a voice, with the wind itself. 3 days later, hikers found her naked, burnt alive. She would not speak for the next 11 years. Doctors claimed she was in shock. Others said she'd suffered a fugue episode. But those who met her eyes said otherwise, that her silence wasn't confusion but containment. She was holding something in. In her final years, Marjorie kept one thing beside her bed, a single candle, wick untouched, never lit. When she died in 2004, no next of kin came forward, but 2 witnesses, nurses at her care facility, said that the night she passed, they heard what sounded like roots cracking stone. And one nurse swears she saw a small girl, maybe 7 or 8, in old-fashioned clothes, standing at the end of the hallway. She was smiling. Next, in the final chapter, we return to the blood-soaked soil of Sweet Hollow for the last time and reveal what was buried beneath the Elbridge curse all along. Sweet Hollow is still on the map, barely. A stretch of Appalachian woodland no longer maintained by any town council. The post office closed in 1987. The church built in 1901 was torn down after a fire gutted the interior. Official, cause electrical fault. Unofficially, there hadn't been electricity in Sweet Hollow for decades. Local hikers still avoid the area, not out of fear, they claim, but because the land doesn't like to be walked on. They describe brittle earth that seems to shift beneath the foot, trees growing inward and perfect, unnatural circles, and in the center of it all, a hollowed-out section of forest that never grows back no matter how much. Time passes. They say birds don't land there, animals don't enter, and in the dead of winter, it remains warm. In 2022, a group of amateur ghost hunters from Lexington Live streamed a night in Sweet Hollow. They joked, laughed, taunted the spirits. By midnight, the camera was still recording, but no one was in the frame. All 6 were later found unconscious in different parts of the forest. No memory of what happened. All suffered severe burns on the soles of their feet. No, fire had been lit. The footage was taken down, re-uploaded by someone else, and then vanished again. But some things remain in Sweet Hollow. If you walk the trails, just after dusk, some say you can still hear the sound of digging beneath the soil. Not shovels, hands, and every now and then on a windless night, a single voice carries across the trees. A little girl's voice. It says, "Tell them we're still here." The Elbridge name hasn't been uttered publicly in years, but old county records show a single act of property deed still attached to that bloodline. It's registered to a trust, anonymous, sealed, but the contact email has one strange thing in its address. The number 1891. The same year, Catherine Elbridge was recorded as missing before her brother, the original patriarch, claimed she had run away into the woods. They say the land never forgot her, and neither did whatever lives beneath it. You want to know what happened to the Elbridges, why they vanished from history, why no graves were ever found, and why the family legacy was scrubbed from records across the state. Because it wasn't just about secrecy, it was containment. A curse doesn't end because a bloodline dies. It ends when the last person refuses to feed it. And somewhere in the woods of Sweet Hollow, someone still